All right, good afternoon. This is used to be skinny, but not so skinny, Kenny. Um, Giving you a review of the 2010 to 2015 super welterweight, junior middleweight, 154-pound division. Exciting era in boxing and an exciting division. Um, First, 2010 to 2015. We'll come back around later and do the current since 2015 to the present, but I'm going to go through a few divisions during this quarantine time and go over a few of the divisions from 2010 to 2015 because the era is over. But it's not so far back that people have forgotten about them, and they're not nostalgic super figures from the past like guys like Leonard and Hearns and Hagler and from the 80s or Trinidad De La Hoya in the 90s and early 2000s. They're still there. Many of these fighters are still fighting, but almost all of them, but not all of them, are out of the division. And so it's a good era. You sum up, you see what's happening now. It tells you a lot about some of these trends that have gone through. And the division, 154. 154, 130, 168, cruiserweight, the newer in-between divisions often get a bad rap. But 154 probably 140, but more so 154, is restudied all of the champions in all the weight classes before I did this video. And 154 is a great spot. And great stuff happens when you research it in the 154 division. The reason for that is 147 is a glory division in boxing. 147, you think of the best years maybe of Sugar Ray Robinson, definitely the best years of Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Carlos Palomino, Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford. A lot of those guys, that is their division. That's where they became famous. Also, the other side of 154 is middleweight. Glory division going all the way back. All right, back to Stanley Ketchel. But, Sugar Ray Robinson, his fame was at 160. Guys like Rocky Graziano, Tony Zale, the Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, all at 160. Carlos Monzon, Emil Griffith, Nino Benvenuti, up through Marvin Hagler. Of course, then Hearns and Leonard went up to 160, and then taking you through, had a little dead period in the 2010 to 2015 in that division. But Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones, the early 2000s. Sidelight guys like Jermaine Taylor, Kelly Pavlik. Present 160 is popping again. Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin, Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, as you headed to the future. And then you have some guys at 154 who will probably get to 160. Jamel Charlo, Jared Hurd, Jaime Munguia. So with 160 and 147, that gives you, two real benchmarks. And so what happens is a lot of your great 147s will flow on into 154 which many people think will happen with Spence, um, Drawn Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, guys now. And of course, it happened in the past regularly. And a lot of your great 160s started as 154s, as Canelo now, Charlo now, Andre now. So exciting division by default. If you're sitting between those two spots with 4 titles available these days, things are going to happen. All right, you got to have some action, and you're going to have some names having the action. All right, names in the era. All right, there's some unknowns. Sergey Zendurik. To only be a big name if you're in Europe, probably just Eastern Europe and Russia. Zerbek Bangsurov is actually a champion. Both of those guys were WBO champions. Liam Smith, big name now, England. All right, Carlos Molina. Ishe Smith, pretty big name in America because he was on the Contender. Cornelius Bundridge. So you have some guys that you don't hear about. Some side stories. Sergio Martinez was a champion when the era started, but he quickly left. He was promoted to super champion. Promoted not to super champion, but to the highest champion in the WBC. But then he quickly goes up to 160 and starts winning titles and is the dominant fighter from 2010 to 2015 at middleweight. Manny Pacquiao, the famous 8-division champion, but a lot of that excitement and currently being at welterweight, he came up and won a title at that weight. Miguel Cotto, 2-time champion at 154 during the era. And then your hardcores of the era. Floyd Mayweather was not a hardcore of the era, but he did some serious damage in the era and had a couple of his biggest fights and made big money, right, in the division. And your hardcores leaders of that era, Austin Trout, Miguel Cotto, Erislandy Lara, and Canelo Alvarez. All right, so you're getting a lot of names, big names. You can't get much bigger than Floyd, Canelo, and then Miguel Cotto, and throw in a dash of Austin Trout and Erislandy Lara. You've got some names at that division. Then you got your sidelines, guys who were nibbling around but really didn't stay there, in the era with both Charlo brothers, who held titles as twins, and Pacquiao and Martinez. So you definitely have the big names. When you throw in Cotto, Alvarez, Mayweather, they might have had the biggest names of any division in that era. All right, so let's go over the organizations. All right, WBO, the champions were, it starts off with Sergey Zendurik from the Ukraine. He's actually champion from 2009 to 2011. He had 6 defenses. 2011, he gives the title over to Zerbek Bangsurov, a Russian fighter, who both of those guys weren't defeated. Bangsurov was stripped, and the title went to Budu Andrade, who summarily was stripped, right, for inactivity. And Bangsurov got the title from Zendurik, who was stripped. Right, so, and that's in the WBO. So then Andrade, in his permanent contract struggles, was stripped, and the title went to Liam Smith. Liam Smith got the title and went to Texas Stadium and lost to Canelo Alvarez. Liam Smith is still around in the division and probably will get a title shot or even the title back. All right. So that's what's going on in the WBO. All right. So not a lot of big names, not a lot of action there. Heavy European flavor, but then they end up with the second biggest name of all, Canelo. All right. The IBF. IBF had a low profile excitement going. The half decade starts with Cornelius Canaan Bundridge, a contender guy. Right, a lot of losses, tough guy story. Goes to the Kronk gym off from the contender and beats Corey Spinks, wins the title. Holds it for a while, is defeated by another contender alum, Ishe Smith. Ishe Smith then quickly loses to Carlos Molina, and then Molina loses to Bundridge. So Bundridge dominated the IBF title through that period. And I, for one, knew who he was, but only looking through the records, realized how strong and good Bundridge was. Dominant fighter in the division over the 5-year period. He finally loses the title for good in 2015 when he's knocked out by Jamal Charlo. So, Canaan Bundridge had a good era. In the WBA, got your bigger names, which often happens to Americans, bigger names. Starts off Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto has the WBA title. He is a big name. One of the 3 biggest names in boxing, probably in that era. 3 or 4 biggest names. Cotto is upset in New York, as the most prominent Puerto Rican fighter of that era. Cotto is defeated in New York by Austin Trout, who's actually from New Mexico. And Trout defeats Cotto, holds the title a while, becomes a big name, and then he is defeated by Canelo Alvarez. Alvarez, also in that time period, battles Erislandy Lara in an extremely close fight. Still controversial. The Lara fight is sort of like the Castillo fight for Mayweather. People argue, did Canelo lose that fight? It's that close. But Lara, who is always respected, becomes sort of a semi-star from that fight. And Trout increases, in a pretty close fight with Canelo, he increases his stock, and they become the bigger names in the division. So now you've added 2 more names to go with your big names of Cotto, Alvarez, and Mayweather in the division. All right. So Alvarez actually gets the title, all right, and then is defeated by Mayweather, who then gives up the title, and Lara gets the title and holds it for the last 2.5 years of the little half decade, and then continues all the way to 2017. He has the WBA regular title at present in 2020. So, Erislandy Lara, Trout, Cotto, Alvarez, you have some really big names battling it out in the WBA. WBC, Martinez starts off with the belt. Pacquiao then gets the belt. They both move on. And then Canelo Alvarez holds it until you have the big fight with he and Mayweather. Can't get much bigger than Alvarez Mayweather, over 2 million pay-per-view buys. The biggest name of the recent past against the biggest name of the present in boxing. All right, Mayweather defeats Alvarez, sits on the side, and then the other becomes champion emeritus, but walks away slowly, and Jamal Charlo ends up picking up that belt to end the half decade. So that's how things went as far as the order of what's going on in the division. All right. They have some huge names. I don't know if any division, including heavyweights and welterweights, will have bigger names than these guys. And there's only one fight bigger than the Canelo Mayweather fight, and that was, of course, the Pacquiao Mayweather fight. All right. So, big fights of the era. Pacquiao Margarito, big deal. Sort of the heyday of Manny Pacquiao. All right. Bundrich Smith, two contender alumni fighting for the title. And you have the era ended. Bundrich losing to Jamal Charlo, which sort of passes us on into the next era in the division. Cotto Trout. It's a guy coming out of nowhere, getting a big name. All right. Alvarez Lara. Talked about how significant that fight is. Its significance will continue on. Alvarez Trout. Can't forget that one. Also, Lara defeated Trout. All right, in a dominant performance and kind of established himself as the guy in the division. And then, of course, the big one, 2.4 million pay-per-views, Alvarez versus Mayweather in 2013. All right, so some very big fights, a lot of excitement in the division, a lot of big names. The top fighters in that division, right, from 2010 to 2015. Great names. All right, Cotto, Miguel Cotto, all-time great, future Hall of Famer, the carrier of the Puerto Rican boxing flag for your early 2000s after Trinidad. Didn't spend as much time in the division. Actually comes back and gets the title. It's towards the end of his career. So he starts off with a belt and ends with the belt. Cornelius Bundrich, K9, underrated. Kind of controlled the division as the main challenger or the champion in the IBF for most of the half decade. Austin Trout fought Cotto, fought Alvarez, fought Lara. Beat Cotto, gave good fights, but lost to both of the big names. The best fighter at 154 of 2010 to 2015, the biggest money maker, but not the dominant fighter of the era because he didn't have to be. He passed through, did his damage, could care less about the titles, something he taught to Alvarez. Floyd Money Mayweather. Money Mayweather has, the massive fight with Alvarez. He ends up with 2 titles. 2 different guys get titles because he gave the title up. All right, Lara got one. Charlo got one. All right, defeats the biggest guy. Does not fight. He also beat Cotto, but I don't think the fight was at one. The fight was not at 154. All right, so just Floyd being Floyd, really dominant. But because he doesn't care about the division, the belts, he's making enough money to where he'll come in, get your belt, hold it, sit on it, get stripped, give it up, and the organizations do nothing because he's Floyd Mayweather. So he established himself, established his way of dominating, right, during that time period. All right, Erislandy Lara. By normal standards, Lara might be the fighter of the era. Lara fought Canelo, beat Trout, beat a few other good fighters, held the title for what will end up a 4-year period, held it for 2.5 years during this half decade. Does a lot of things. Mary does a lot of great things. Um, as a 154, trying to dominate, he'll end up unifying. By a lot of standards, a lot of people would consider him the fighter of the era. However, we're going to go with a different guy. Was not the best fighter of the era. Obviously, that's Mayweather. But the guy who tried to dominate the division and be one of the best fighters was Lara. Canelo Alvarez, though, is the guy we're going to here lean to as the top guy in the 154-pound division from 2010 to 2015. He holds 3 of the titles without unifying. He had a stretch as a WBA champion, he was a WBC champion, and WBO during that time period. He learned well from Mayweather. When you look at the things he does, his movements, some in the ring and definitely out of the ring, you can see that Canelo Alvarez is heavily influenced by Floyd Mayweather. Does not worry about the organizations, does not worry too much about weight classes. He bounce in, bounce out, get a title, give it up. He may unify, he may not. All right, very Floyd-like in that era. What he does is get the big fights, get the big names. He fought Trout, he fought Cotto, but that was at 160. He fought Mayweather, he fought Lara. Right, if you're a big name, he'll fight you, and the organizations will pretty much put a title on it because his sanctioning fees, like Floyd, are worth them bending their rules. And so learned well. All right, came up on the Floyd undercards, then fought Floyd, and then kind of takes the mantle as the #1 pay-per-view guy, and then went to the Zone and got a massive, unusual contract for a boxer. So out of the ring, he's been excellent, and in the ring, quite excellent in the era. So that's kind of what was going on 2010 to 2015 in the 154-pound weight division. Great division. Still a great division. All right. Have lots of exciting action there. Charlo, Alvarez have moved on. Lara, Trout are still battling out in the division. Guys like Jarrett Hurd, Jamel Charlo, Tony Harrison, Jaime Munguia, who's since moved on to middleweight. Demetrius Andrade has moved on to middleweight, are there. So, you have plenty of excitement in the division. Right now, very close, exciting division. Right, with guys coming from 147 and moving to 160. It's still sort of that exciting gateway. It is at the present. We will definitely cover this again later. If you don't think of the 154-pound division, remember we said Leonard was a champion, Hearns was a champion. Winky Wright's dominant period, Hall of Famer, 154, Shane Mosley. champion. Terry Norris, longtime champion, as mostly as a 154. Julian Jackson, Mike McCallum, right? Gerald McClendon, all a lot of their best years, most exciting times were at 154. So great division. All right, we'll see it again, and we hope you enjoyed what you saw at this point. Not so skinny, Kenny. Have a good one.